सबका बचपन मुस्काए, अंडा बच्चों के मन भाए, कुदरत का वरदान है।
चैंपियन बनने का एक फंडा, रोज खाओ अंडा।
My journey of insurance and investments began at the same time, when I invested in LIC SEEP. In this fast-moving world, SEEP can balance your funds with security and growth. SEEP will take care of the ups and downs of the market and will give you fruitful results so that you enjoy the ride. And when SEEP is with you, you can soar high.
LIC's unit-linked insurance plan SEEP offers savings and protection so that you can soar high in your life. LIC, हर पल आपके साथ.
Well, women have been at the forefront of our fight against the pandemic. Every crisis is an opportunity for us to learn and evolve, and COVID-19 has stamped that for us. For the keynote address on how women fought the pandemic and the lessons learned, we have one of the most indomitable and astute leaders of our times. Please welcome Ms. Kiran Mazumdar, Chairperson, Biocon.
You look at the COVID pandemic. When we started and entered into the pandemic, India was unprepared, under-resourced, and really very, very challenged. I remember that in early March, when we were trying to understand how we should deal with the pandemic, we realized that we didn't have enough test kits. We were importing all our diagnostic test kits. We didn't have enough labs because it was only government labs that were testing. And we were testing less than 10,000 people a day. Whereas what we needed was, many fold more than this. But we simply didn't have enough diagnostic tests. And then there was a huge effort in the biotech sector. Small companies, startups, even mid-sized companies all started rising to the challenge and saying, let's develop indigenous test kits. And the first off the block was a small company from Pune, My Labs, headed by, or at least co-founded by a woman, Meena Bhosle, who actually developed the first approved indigenously made RT-PCR test. And it is said that she just made sure that it was delivered to the market, and then she went and delivered a baby. So that was the kind of dedication which scientists had in addressing this pandemic. I must also mention that at that time, there were a number of women who played leadership roles in managing the pandemic. I started with Meena Bhosle. There were many other women who also developed and involved with making test kits, to address the need of the nation. Then we had Priya Abraham, who actually, who heads the National Institute of Virology, and who actually played a very strong leadership role in sequencing the virus, in creating a viral repository, in actually, working with Bharat Biotech in developing our inactivated viral vaccine, the Covaxin product, which today is, been approved and it's undergoing deployment. So I think she's played a very important role. We had the Secretary, Department of Biotechnology, Renu Swaroop, who of course has played an amazing role in getting industry together, in making sure that we funded many companies who are developing novel vaccine platforms or novel diagnostics. And she actually involved me in a very interesting program called NBRIC, which was about indigenizing all the resources required to manufacture, whether it was kits, whether it was RT-PCR kits or antibody kits or antigen kits. And I think this was a very exciting opportunity for me because I came to work with a large number of startup companies who were actually doing bits and pieces of various components. And I brought them all together so that they could actually develop many of these requirements, which helped us to combat the pandemic. And then, of course, there were many pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical companies that developed drugs or repurposed drugs to treat the pandemic, and so on and so forth. You know, whether it is women doctors, whether it is women scientists, whether it is women software engineers, because that was another big need of the hour, which was about software development, whether it was an Arogya Setu app, whether it was the COVID app. And, you know, the pandemic also forced us to work remotely. And in this whole digital world that we were thrown into, a large number of apps were developed and a large number of contactless technologies were developed. And many of these companies had women as co-founders. So I was really excited with the kind of opportunities that were thrown up for women entrepreneurs, for women in leadership roles. We also know about how in the early stages, Kerala learned to deal with the pandemic very efficiently thanks to their health secretary, Shailaja, Dr. Shailaja, and so on and so forth. So I think we've seen a large number of women playing a very important role in managing the pandemic. I think India actually did a pretty decent job when it comes to the pandemic. You know, whether it's our doctors who basically left no stone unturned in managing to, you know, the disease, in experimenting with new drugs and new therapies to basically save patients. And I think India has done very well out of that. Or whether it was how hospitals learned to basically expand their capacities for COVID patients, or whether how governments actually created large stadiums into COVID care centers and so on and so forth. I think there was a huge amount of collective effort. It was, you know, everyone was in mission mode. And of course, India always rises to the fore when it comes to a crisis. And I think India did come well out of that. Now let's look at what else has happened in the COVID world for India. I think one of the biggest outcomes of this pandemic is vaccine diplomacy. I think many parts of our, you know, industry capabilities were taken for granted. I don't think anyone realized how large our vaccine industry was. The world did not recognize this until COVID happened. Today, India is recognized as the undisputed leader when it comes to vaccine production. Now it appears that we are also one of the largest producers of vials, of syringes, of needles, because obviously all that goes into, you know, vaccination, and we have taken that for granted. But if you think about the fact that we cater to 60% of the world's vaccine needs, and we, you know, cater to an equal percentage of the needs for syringes and vials and needles, and yet our global market share is only about 3%. It tells you that we have an opportunity to move from volume to value. How do we climb up that value curve is the question. So now in the post-COVID world, India needs to brand herself in a way that actually positions us in that very strong leadership role that we are playing in global healthcare. I mean, I almost tell people, if you imagine a world without India, I can tell you global healthcare would be in a very precarious situation where most people would not have access to a vaccine or a generic drug or to any life-saving or essential medicines. That's the truth. And therefore, India has to understand that this is the role they are playing in the global supply chains, in global healthcare. And that is what people need to recognize about the role of India in healthcare. To me, this is a very important inflection point in our journey. And I think it's an inflection point that we should really now leverage to our advantage. How do we create that brand value for India and its role in global healthcare? How do we make people realize that we are the best value for money proposition anywhere in the world? And how do we make people realize that India actually is, you know, playing a huge role in supporting global healthcare and, you know, providing the great outcomes that we are seeing in global healthcare the world over. We know that even the most advanced economies in the world are today dependent on India for even its vaccine needs, where countries like Canada and UK and many other countries actually have said, look, we will bend our regulations, but we need your vaccines. This is the desperation that the Western economies have today, whereas India is in that fortunate position of having vaccine adequacy, even though we have such a large population. The other thing I want to talk about is that, look, we are now in a digital world. We are in a world that is very different to what we walked into. And I think this is a world that is shaping the future. And I think as a country, as an economy, we need to take advantage of the fact that India is also very strong in digital capabilities, just as it is in the healthcare capabilities. So if you combine the two, we have a great story to tell. We have a story to tell in terms of our strong capabilities in digital and our strong capabilities when it comes to pharma, biotech, and healthcare in general. So I just think that this is an inflection point where we need to pivot. We need to actually start looking at the way we've been doing things and making sure we don't revert back to our bad habits and our inefficient ways of doing things, but move ahead, spurred by technology, spurred ahead by the new opportunities that we see, and make sure that we don't really lose this opportunity and squander this opportunity. Because we have this opportunity to come out with very far-reaching regulatory reforms. We have technology that has shown us that you can actually bring a vaccine to the market in less than a year, the world over. Why would we want to go back to a world that follows a regulatory process that takes 5 to 10 years to do the same thing? Why is it that we can't now use intelligent technologies and information technologies and data science to take very calculated judgment calls, whether it is about approving drugs and vaccines, whether it is the way we manage healthcare, whether it is the way we offer telemedicine or e-pharmacies. I think all these are very exciting opportunities, and we must encourage our young entrepreneurs to basically leverage all these exciting opportunities and not come in the way by starting to institute regulatory hurdles that just don't allow them to basically pursue these opportunities. So I think these are some of the things we must think about. The government policy makers must also pivot, must also be agile, and must also innovate. I don't want this to be an opportunity lost, because we don't want those policy makers to say, okay, now that the pandemic is over, let's go back to business as usual, and let's go back to the way we used to do things in terms of regulating businesses. That would be a wasted opportunity. We simply cannot allow it to be business as usual. It has to be business unusual, business in the future, business which has to be very different. And therefore, we have to be a country and a policy-making nation that really takes advantage of all that has worked to our favor, all that has enabled us to progress and advance at speed. And this is something which we have not even realized, because we were not even a country that knew how to do clinical trials well. And yet, during this pandemic, we've suddenly become a very strong country when it comes to doing clinical trials and clinical research. Let's not lose that opportunity. This is what leads to strong innovation. This is what leads to great IP. And this is what will allow us to move from volume to value. That is my proposal and proposition to the policymakers. Let's create that brand value for India, which is a very strong value proposition that says the best value for money comes from India.
अंडा खाओ, ताकत पाओ, 100% है प्रोटीन मन मुस्काए, अंडा बच्चों के मन भाए, कुदरत का वरदान है।
चैंपियन बनने का एक फंडा, रोज खाओ अंडा।
गाइस कल मेरी नई बाइक आ रही है।
ग्रेट, तब तो आई विल कम विद रोहन एवरी डे।
इंश्योरेंस है?
तुझे क्या लगता है इंश्योरेंस पीयूसी सब कुछ है?
आई वाज टॉकिंग अबाउट लाइफ इंश्योरेंस फॉर सिया।
जोक्स अपार्ट गाइस, बट आज मजा कल सजा नहीं होनी चाहिए।
सीरियसली, लाइफ इंश्योरेंस तो जरूरी है।
LIC का न्यू जीवन आनंद देता है डबल फायदा। मैच्योरिटी पे मिले फुल पेमेंट और लाइफ कवर चले जिंदगी भर।
ए हेलो, इंश्योरेंस है क्या?
That's a wonderful thought. You've closed your speech with that we have to build on our brand proposition, move from volume to value. Now, even as we speak about India's vaccine diplomacy, and it's made all of us immensely proud, I wanted to get your thoughts in on, there is still a lot of concern and apprehension about getting the vaccine, about the efficacy of the vaccine, about the time between the two doses. Should it be 28 days? Should it be longer than 28 days? So there are people who are holding back on that. Before I come to larger questions, I want you to address this very eminent question that a lot of people have on their minds. Should they go in for a vaccine? What would be your thoughts on that?
My immediate answer is absolutely. Please do not hesitate to take a vaccine, because a vaccination protects you. And I can tell you that, you get protected even when you take your first shot, because it does give you some protection. It protects you from falling seriously ill. And I think that itself is a very good reason why you should vaccinate yourself. I, for one, have strongly believed that we should be vaccinating as many people as we possibly can. So whilst we went through phase 1, which was about the frontline healthcare workers and the essential workers, and now we've gone into phase 2, which are the elderly and the slightly younger people with comorbidities. The fact that we are seeing such surges in numbers, and you're seeing that most of these infected cases are younger people below the age of 40, it tells you that these are people who are students, who are the working classes, and they need to be vaccinated much sooner than later. I, for one, hope that the government allows the general population to be vaccinated ASAP. I also hope that corporates are given that opportunity to vaccinate their employees and their immediate dependent family members, because at least that way we will be ensuring that our workplaces are safe, our educational institutes are safe, and that at least most of the young people will be able to access a vaccination in any of the medical centers. And at least hopefully that will really help us to contain the pandemic. So I believe that vaccination is extremely important. Yes, please don't just go by those anecdotal kind of reports of, this happened and that happened, because the majority of people don't really have serious adverse events. In any vaccination program, you're bound to have adverse events and serious adverse events. But, we should not be hesitant to take those vaccines for those reasons. We simply must go and vaccinate ourselves.
Okay. And we did speak about, you did touch upon and another wave, maybe a second wave or a third wave. Do you think that there would be a second wave?
Well,
we are seeing cases right now.
Well, Shweta, the problem is that the moment you allow people to congregate in large numbers in any given space, you are going to see infections rise, because the virus has not really gone away. And the more people you vaccinate, that's the only chance you have to basically drive away the virus. Right now, you haven't driven away the virus because a very small percentage of the people have been vaccinated. And if you don't vaccinate the younger people who are really the spreaders, you're not going to stop the spread of the virus. So whilst you're seeing that you have a large number of cases rising every day, that's because as more people go to malls, or more people go to cricket matches or bars or whatever it is, And young people are a little, carefree. They don't, bother or care about masking themselves as much as we do. I think they should be very careful about that. But despite that, you are going to get infections. So let's vaccinate them as fast as we can. So I, for one, believe that we should vaccinate as many people as we can, especially those that live in these large, dense clusters.
Okay. And at which point does herd immunity kick in? I remember the last time we spoke, you said something very important, that the virus will burn itself out before the vaccine becomes available. And we did see that. We saw cases dipping as the vaccine availability became, more and more people could access the vaccine. But so there's this whole debate around, has herd immunity kicked in, and what point does it kick in, or has it kicked in?
So, herd immunity kicks in pockets. So if you have, for instance, very dense populations where a large number of people have been infected, that is what would lead to a herd immunity. Let's face it, we are a very large country. And so you cannot have herd immunity everywhere. So you will have herd immunity in pockets. Like, for instance, I'll just give you an example. If you're in a college, where a large number of people are infected, you can get herd immunity. But you can't assume that there's herd immunity when you leave the college and you start mingling with people outside, because they are not living in those dense clusters. So I think we need to understand that there are two types of herd immunities. One is natural herd immunity that happens by people infecting each other and creating cross-reactivity and thereby immune protection. But the more important way of creating herd immunity is through vaccination. So vaccine-induced herd immunity is far better than just getting people to develop herd immunity through infection.
Okay. Now I want to ask you about the role of women in the post-pandemic world, right? The pandemic disrupted the way we work. It disrupted the way we live our lives. It's disrupted the way we network. It's disrupted the way we educate ourselves, everything. In the healthcare space, of course, women have taken a lead, and you beautifully illustrated all of that. I want to ask you, in terms of the new opportunities that this post-COVID world holds, especially for women professionals, because across the world there is concern that the pandemic affected women very adversely, since they were the ones at home trying to work from home with other responsibilities. So ultimately, the responsibility of caretaking, being a parent, working, all of that fell on the women, and a lot of women dropped out of the workforce. This is especially true for the United States or for Europe. In India, we don't have data right now. But when I do speak to people, they tell me there are two narratives to this. One is this, and the other narrative is that there are now more work from home positions opening up, more virtual positions opening up. So, a professional could be, say, in a remote town in one part of the country, and she could be employed with a company in Bangalore, because all of it is happening virtually. Do you see that happening? Do you see Indian corporates adapting to this model? And how do you see this post-pandemic world panning out for women professionals?
So I feel that if corporates don't, sort of respond to this opportunity of having remote working or a hybrid working model, I think they will miss out on a huge opportunity. Because, finding talent that always is willing to relocate is very difficult.
Absolutely.
And this actually allows you to be global, to be, agnostic to location, and it allows you to get really good talent, especially for roles that don't require talent, those roles to actually be located in any specific area. Of course, there are certain jobs and certain roles where you have to get people to come to work. Manufacturing jobs, for instance, you cannot do that remote working in the way you just described. So I just think that this is a huge opportunity for companies in many, many ways. One is in terms of talent. One is in terms of actually becoming almost like an asset-like model, because you don't have to keep investing in office space all the time, because you can then start having a hybrid model where you have rotating jobs that use offices at different times. So I think gives us that opportunity to be very pragmatic, efficient, and very flexible. And I think that's very, very important. And it helps women because yes, you're right. Women were very badly affected by the pandemic in many ways. One is when there were sort of layoffs, I think women were laid off first, and that was unfair. And then, of course, the women who are not laid off and who have to work from home, you're very right. I think most women felt that they had to do their dual chores of their domestic and their professional responsibilities at a very high level. Whereas men actually got away by just doing their professional responsibilities and almost got served by their wives almost,
So, do you see attitudes changing? Do you think there'll be more trust, where India is concerned? Because while hybrid models are more popular in the Western world, they aren't as popular in India. Besides maybe the IT industry. So, do you think? I mean, do you get a sense that the Indian corporate sector might actually start trusting their employees more, and they will more seamlessly adapt to this flexible working models? Do you get that sense?
So, you have to be a bit innovative about these hybrid models. It's not about saying that a certain number of people will work from home and a certain number of people will have to come on site. It's about rotating those jobs, giving people an opportunity to work from home. And it's about allowing every employee to be flexible so that they can work from home for a certain number of days a month, and so on and so forth. So I think most people, I don't think, prefer working from home all the time. I think people do need to get to work because there's a very important aspect of networking and sort of the professional interaction that you need in the workplace. And you cannot sacrifice that either. So when I'm talking about a hybrid model, it means that you should be able to rotate these jobs so that people come to the office a certain number of days a month. And anyway, people who do work remotely, it's not a very healthy model to have them just working remotely. I think you do need to get them to the site or to various kind of centers of your operations so that at least they get to interact with people on a one-to-one kind of basis.
When it comes to new ways of working, what are the sectors that you're extremely optimistic about, which would be the growth drivers in the post-COVID world?
Of course, starting with my own sector, the pharma biotech sector has a huge opportunity now that it's in the spotlight. And I think I'm very excited because at long last, I think it's been a recognized sector. I think a lot of policies and investment decisions are being made favoring the sector, which was for too long ignored. And then, of course, you've got the whole IT and software sector, which is also going to benefit hugely from this remote virtual world that we are in. And, the world of the future is going to mirror what we've seen in the pandemic. The third, of course, sector is going to be the healthcare sector, because I think we've realized how much we've underinvested in primary healthcare, in tertiary healthcare. And, I think we need to reimagine the way we are going to deliver universal healthcare. So I think there's going to be a lot of investment in these sectors. And then I'm very optimistic about some of the other opportunities that we are seeing during this time, which is really about robotics and drone technologies and space technologies, because we are already seeing that climate change also is becoming a very important focus for us. In the pandemic world, where we've suddenly seen that just a few months of being immobile has cleaned up the whole planet. And so I think renewable energy is also going to be a huge opportunity. I do believe that electric vehicles are going to be a big opportunity going forward. And I also believe that agriculture is also going to be a huge opportunity. Agri-tech, and this whole opportunity that we have of really making sure that, we strengthen our agriculturists in terms of their employability, their economic viability, etc., is also a big opportunity for India.
Okay, so you sound a lot more optimistic than pessimistic, and that's very heartening to know. And I think that's a great way to kick off the India Today Women's Summit. Thank you very much, Ms. Shaw, for taking out the time and talking to us.